Okay, I think we are about ready to start. I'm just going to keep on letting more folks in as they pop up. And we are recording, so we are good to go, I think. Okay, well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Glad to see everyone here with us today for another Top 5 webinar. And what I wanted to show you real quick was our website in case you're new to KMI. And if you have any interest in more webinars like this or KM training, in general, we'd love to help you out. Just go to kminstitute.org. And for content like this, if you just hover over the webinars section over here, you'll see all kinds of great presentations. But for webinars specifically, just click on the KMI webinars section right here. And that will point you to what's coming up next and recent webinars that we've recorded. And you can see it just keeps scrolling and scrolling. So we've had a lot of activity the last couple of months. John Hovell has been a big part of some of those. So yeah, so check that out whenever you can. And again, it's kminstitute.org. And if you're interested in KM certification or training, we'd be happy to help you out with that as well. And that's the best way to reach us for questions on that. It's just email the training email address. Lori, if you can maybe put that up on the chat box, that'd be great. To reach us for any questions about training, it's training@kminstitute.org. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to begin. I'd like to introduce our hosts for today. We have John Hovell, who's a KMI instructor and CEO of Tactical International, and co-host Merrill Ann Jordan, who's a past grad of KMI, and she's the training and knowledge manager of Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. So without further ado, let me hand it over to you folks, and thanks for hosting today.
Eric, Lori, and KMI. Merrill, should we introduce ourselves and say hi first?
Yes.
How would you like to say hi?
I guess I'll go first.
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm really excited to be here. John asked me if I would give some thoughts about this topic. I have worked in a variety of fields. As you all know, knowledge management can apply to many different things. So I've worked for USAID contractors, I've worked in software development, and I now work in cybersecurity. And it's been a learning process along the way. So I'm really excited to share with you my thoughts about this, but I want to make a disclaimer. They are not all encompassing. Knowledge management is fluid in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to present today with John and to have this conversation with you all.
Yeah, it's fun, and it is meant to be a conversation, and it's also meant to be a bit fun. So I think this is the third or fourth in the series that Eric started up, I don't know, a few months ago, a top 5 series. And I don't know, it makes me giggle every time because I think of it as like in the States, we have these late night TV shows that used to have top 5 or top 10 lists. And the whole fun of the top 10 list is, of course, it's wrong. We've prepared for you a top 5 from Merrill and a top 5 from John. It's a starting point. It begins the conversation. And we're actually kind of hoping that all of you also have your own top 5. For today, the top 5 is, what are the top 5 ways to measure knowledge management? So Merrill and I have had a couple of prep sessions. Merrill was a bit humble there. Merrill has a monitoring, evaluation, and learning background. So I'm a little bit out of my league on this one, but let's try it and see how it goes. And after we share our top 5, then we'll chat about it in small groups. But sorry, Merrill, what were you going to say?
I was going to add first, tall order. But second, it's funny because as we discuss this today, I think you will all find, John and I, we matched in some ways, but in some ways we didn't. And I think that's really shaped by your experiences and your context. And so that's important to understand today as well as we talk about this topic and how to measure things, because measurement always depends on your context and how you measure it, always.
Are you ready? Number 5?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, you're up first. Here you go. Number 5 from Merrill.
So quantitative, this speaks really to my current position as well as my previous positions. I've spent a lot of time over the years building databases randomly. I've built Access databases. I've built Google Sites. We now have a Confluence knowledge base. And one of the things that is incredibly important to especially the higher ups is quantitative data, logins, number of edits, number of people engaging with different pages or different content. So for me, this is number 5.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Merrill. Let me show my number 5. I also noticed in chat, hopefully everybody can see, it's just one slide that we're going to. Okay, Lisa's got it now. Great, thank you. So yes, number 5 for me. And some of you, I recognize several names, so great to see you again. And you might recognize this one. This really does still make it to my top 5. I think it's so important, especially when measuring knowledge management, comparing to measuring other types of projects or programs or offerings. I think one of the very first questions you should be considering, or I like to consider, is, am I measuring flow or am I measuring stock? And I realize they're slightly strange words, but the thinking is, measuring stock is very similar to what Merrill is talking about, the quantitative. Am I measuring number of documents, number of databases, number of users, number of people, number of edits, number of logins, the same kind of quantitative stuff. That to me is stock. It's an example of stock. It's piles of stuff. To me, measuring flow is a very different thing. And I think there's either confusion or lack of contracting or lack of shared understanding of, if we're trying to measure flow. I remember one time being at a knowledge management conference, and there were oil and gas experts were there, and they had pulled up the fluid dynamics chart that shows how to measure the speed of liquid flow, but it was very physical liquid, and they were trying to convert it to intangible flow. How well does knowledge flow? How well does trust flow? How fast do your emotions flow and change, your thoughts? That's, I think, right up front, a really important, when you're thinking about measuring knowledge management, flow or stock. Merrill, number 4.
Yeah, so we've covered the assets, right? We've covered the the non-people piece. So now for me, purpose and audience. I mentioned before, and I think you can tell probably at this point, this is incredibly important to me. You have to define your purpose. You have to define your audience, because your context matters. And so our context is always different. I remember doing some fun activities around this in our certification course with John, with KMI. And it was always a little bit different. It changes. So I want to impress the need upon how much it's going to change. And frankly, it might even change like midway. I've had projects start, and then all of a sudden I've worked for a lot of small companies. I now work for a huge one, but in the small companies, you've got a lot of fingers in the pot. Usually you've got a lot of people sort of giving input. And sometimes the purpose of the audience changes, or it shifts halfway through, and you have to sort of revisit what that means. And that actually ties into one of my later ones as well.
It does. So number 4 for me, almost identical. In fact, I guess it is identical. Merrill had a little more detail. We really did these lists separate, so it was kind of fun to bring them together and look at them. So I'm really just almost repeating what Merrill just said. After you've put some thought into flow and stock, what kind of measurement are we doing? Let's be clear on what's the purpose. What does success look like for this measurement? And I also remember, Merrill, when you and I were chatting about this, we wondered, as you're coming into this webinar, we wondered if people might be specifically looking for examples of quantitative stock measurements. So we had this little joke back and forth of, it's almost like we're cheating a little bit on ways to measure, as opposed to giving you specific quantitative examples of measurement. We are trying to say, these are things to consider as you're bringing together your measurement approach. So yeah, it looks like we both agree, number 4, define purpose. How about number 3, Merrill?
So I touched on it a little bit, but I guess I'm going to go a little deeper. What's the return on your investment? So like, okay, you've got the quantitative, you got the clicks, you know how much people are engaging, you know who your purpose and your audience is. What's the return on the investment? So what are you actually getting out of your clicks? What are you getting out of your edits? What are you getting out of having all of these knowledge management assets, right? And what's your audience gaining? So that's what my number 3 is. And I think, oftentimes, John, like, I'm sure you can attest to this. Like, you have, COOs, CEOs who are like, well, why are we doing this? What's the reason we're doing this? what's the return on the investment that I get from all this time you're putting into knowledge management? And I know I've had discussions with this about, with many people in KM who have to help their leadership and their company understand the value of it, because oftentimes they don't understand the value of it. And so you have to sort of walk them through why it matters and what the return on the investment is going to be. And a lot of times that's time back and that's money back, right? I think you would agree, right?
Well, I have it on writing here. My number 3, because I felt so guilty that my number 4 and number 5 were a little bit abstract. I thought, okay, I want to at least, it is so difficult to know on a webinar like this, is why top 5s are, just hilarious, because they can't be right. There's no way to, it's almost an infinite list of options of exactly what to measure. But I did feel so guilty. I wanted to give something specific. So I thought about, out of all the lucky knowledge management work I've been able to do, the 2 most impactful, I thought about even separating these out, but I went back and forth. And so I merged together. I gave you 2 specific metrics on a single number here. So my number 3 is, similar to ROI, but a very specific time saved. So for example, well, actually, I'll use time to competency as an example of time saved. So several clients have talked about, if I make up numbers for you, it used to take us 18 months on average. We would watch people's competencies, and it took some amount of time to go from, a new hire, a beginner, a novice in some kind of skill set. And then 18 months later, or 24 or 3 years later, I went from a level 2 to a level 5 as measured by competencies. So quite formal, quite serious. Well, if you bring in communities of practice, if you bring in organizational network analysis, knowledge markets, talent markets, taxonomies, lots of KM techniques, you can begin to prove, I guess in an ROI kind of way, we went from 18 months of competence in this particular role on average to it now takes 6 months. And you can literally calculate a cost savings or a time savings from, ramping up capabilities and competencies faster. In theory, directly related to knowledge management, but that's what makes this whole thing so difficult. I'm not sure you can ever prove the exact direct tie to knowledge management doing it, but that's my number 3 way to measure. Think about how much time you saved, and think about, as one example, did you decrease the time to competency? Are people getting more skilled at their job faster because of knowledge?
That's funny that you say that, because I feel like if you look at the slide, what's the ROI? Time saved, time to competency. And so, that is how you measure ROI. That's exactly it. Those are 2 indicators that you can use. And I learned to do indicators with USAID because USAID has a very defined process in the way that they do monitoring and evaluation, and in the way that they create indicators, and they revisit indicators and modify those. And they have something called performance indicator reference sheets, and it literally will walk you through how to create an indicator. I'm sure there are other resources out there, but that's one that I've stuck to over the years, and that's helped teach me how to choose a good indicator that makes sense, that has all the information. But that's something that I would be happy to share a link to at the end too.
PIRS, right? PIRS.
Yeah, we called them peers.
Peers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, we did a lot with that. We did a lot of creation of indicators. The firm that I was with was a monitoring and evaluation and learning firm, like John mentioned. So I learned quite a bit. What are your individual and team goals? My number 2. All right. So how does this tie to your goals? So I'm going back a little bit, but one of the things that you always have to do is you have to tie it to your goals, right? So you have your indicators, but how do your indicators tie into all of the rest of the things that you're doing? Why do they matter? And the reality is it should be tied to something such as, okay, well, we're going to measure clicks, but then we're also going to measure, for which pages they're engaging in. And oh, by the way, these pages matter because we're trying to teach people about, say, digital forensics and incident response. So they're all clicking on this one page, and we're getting all these people reading the content, and so things like that are what I mean by tying it back to individual and team goals. What are your quarterly projects for folks? What are your yearly, annual goals as a business? Those types of things. So those are my 2 cents. I don't know if you get it, but
I got it. Well said. See, it is like a late night TV show. I can't tell you, just again, recently, someone said to me, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. We were monitoring how many clicks came through this form or this web page, and they found that it was like they were so happy. It was 10,000 clicks a month or 100,000 clicks a week or something like that. Visits to the page or unique visitors, and then someone does some analysis and finds out that a whole department or a whole office IT policy set that page automatically as their homepage. So no one was actually clicking on it or using it. It was just the default page. So, that stuff just comes up so much on ways to kind of play with number of clicks. So yeah, isn't it hilarious? Mine is so similar, but different words. Similar to individual and team goals, I wrote business or organizational project metrics. Okay, so what do I mean by this? In number 3, tried to give a couple of specific KM metrics. This is now me really, I don't know, being a bit challenging, I think. I'm actually saying don't measure KM. That's actually what I'm saying here. I'm saying look at your business metrics. Look at someone else has put together some key performance indicators. The project has a measurement strategy to it. Your boss has some kind of measurement, I guess, like Merrill was just saying, on your individual performance. I'm offering, is there a way for you to put some language, almost tell a story about the KM effort that you did, whatever that was? How did that improve what someone else is measuring? The project metrics, the business metrics, the organizational metrics. I can recall times where I had some really good luck showing not a KM measurement, but how KM improved an existing metrics from a different dashboard. So that's what I'm putting as number 2. It is quite a dodging the question and saying, show your tie of KM to the project metrics. All right. Do we need like a drum roll? Merrill, for your number 1? Here it is. Merrill's number 1.
Merrill's number 1. Okay. Touchy-feely. I'm a believer in the qualitative data. That's what this means. It means the qualitative data. And it's funny because John and I, when we were doing this, we we realized that we were basically saying the same things, but differently. And so the qualitative data matters. I mean, I would say and the reason this is number 1 for me is because from my experience, this matters more almost than the quantitative data, because it doesn't tell the story. Quantitative data is just quantitative data. As John mentioned, you can have an IT policy that informs, hey, we got 150,000 clicks. This is fantastic. And then you just happen to realize, oh, well, the story behind that is that our IT people actually set this as a homepage for folks. So the qualitative data matters even more so than the quantitative data, in my opinion, because it tells the story of what's going on. And in knowledge management, we know that the people matter. And we have this argument during the course, right? People or the sort of the information piece, the assets. So like the people matter, but the frameworks for those matter. But in my opinion, the qualitative, the people, the touchy-feely, that's the most important part of knowledge management and how we measure it.
Love it.
It might not be popular. But it's my number 1.
May or may not be what we're actually being asked for when we're being asked for measurement. And yep, hilarious. Mine is almost identical, just said differently. So I guess that's a takeaway for anybody interested, that how similar our lists are potentially has its own information to see that pattern. So I just use the word storytelling, and I think I will just, what that is. So I'll just jump right into a story. My favorite metric story, probably of all time, or at least the one that sticks with me a lot, one of our favorite clients, a support center or a help desk kind of center. I won't have the exact numbers, and maybe I shouldn't share the exact numbers, but basically the story goes, they were measuring, so back to number 2, their business metric, their project metric was first call resolution rate. They watched it. It was very important to across all of their agents, everybody taking calls and answering chats and emails. How many times on the very first email or the very first phone call or the very first chat message could they answer, according to the customer, their question? First call resolution rate. And their metric was something like 65%, 67, 60, it was in the 60s. And they thought they did an external benchmark, and other help desk centers were like in the 80s, 85, 88, 89% first call resolution rate. So they were quite upset by this. So admittedly, they tried a few things, but one of the things they did was a knowledge retention team for their top agents. They picked 5 or 8 top agents that seemed to have the best first call resolution rate, brought in 2 other levels, people that were mid-career help desk agents and brand new hire, just joining the help desk, formed several knowledge retention teams, ran them over a summer, so 3-4 months of an experiment using knowledge retention teams. Long story short, the number 2 here, the project metric, went from whatever the number was, 65, 67%, to I think like 91%. It went not only way up, but like above average. Now, back to my top 3 or 4 other options here. I don't know that we could specifically say, but that knowledge retention story still stands for it was part of the complexity to improve the business metric that they really cared about.
Yeah.
So there's our top 5 or top 10, but we wanted to, just like we do on all of these top 5 calls, we wanted to sort of back out of the top 10, which is pretty much impossible because it's just so different in every case, and maybe give you more of some details on context. So how would you share this, Merrill?
All right. So these are something that John and I put together, and this is really based on our experience with measuring knowledge management throughout our careers. So if you're looking for something practical, something tactical to take away from today, these are your steps for creating a measurement framework that I think can work well for your situation. So number 1, define your tools and measurement purpose. And you'll notice these are sort of reiterations of things that we touched on in our top 5 too. We just do them a little bit differently. So define your tools and measurement purpose. Number 2, what and why are you trying to measure? So what are you trying to measure? Are you trying to measure all your clicks? Are you trying to measure the storytelling? Are you trying to measure, your time saved, time to competency, things like that? And then what are you going to do with your measurement? So like, what's the purpose? What's the ROI? How will you get a baseline? And a lot of times the way that I do this, and John, I would love to hear how you do this, is by doing a survey. I'm a believer in surveys, key informant interviews, focus group discussions. I do all of those when it comes to getting a baseline on where my staff is at. How do you do that? What's your...
Yeah, thanks for asking. External benchmark. I've got one active external benchmark right now. I just turned in for one of our clients an external benchmark. I can't tell you how common it is to try and look either at your competitors or even at companies you don't compete with, which I love, because what you'll often hear in human resources is it may look like we're not competing with Google or we're not competing with IBM or Facebook, but oftentimes the talent is looking at your company and that other company. So it might look like a completely different industry. So external benchmark to see whatever it is you care about, like first call resolution rate. Maybe I look in my industry, but maybe I go look at some completely different industry to see what the first call resolution rate is over in that other industry. So baseline from other companies, what does their data look like?
Thank you, Lisa, for sharing that useful tool in the chat. It looks like this is a global health related one.
Nice.
Yeah. So I also want to make a disclaimer. I also focus heavily on change management in the way that I approach knowledge management, because I have faced a lot of situations. Like I mentioned, I've worked in a lot of small businesses over the years. And there's typically, we know that knowledge management, I mean, John, tell me, what was it, 3 years to fruition for a knowledge management initiative to come to full circle? It's a long time.
Transformational, yeah.
It's a long time. And so the way that you approach the change that you're trying to, to create in your organization, whether that's how people access information or where they access information, it takes time. And it matters how you manage the communication, how you manage the change itself, how you roll it out, how you get your stakeholder buy-in, because engaging your stakeholders from the beginning and making sure they understand what and why you're doing this and how this is going to benefit them is important. And that also is part of the reason that I measure my baseline through the focus group discussions, through the key informant interviews, and really in discussion with folks, because I want to make sure they feel heard. So that's my disclaimer for change management. I am a firm believer that it plays a huge role in the way that we implement these knowledge management changes and initiatives in our organizations. Do you want to, do you want to pick up the floor, John?
Sure, yeah. And I was just going to build on the change management too and say that both of our number ones are quite change related, bringing people along with you on the change. Sure. So the continue to measure, this is not to forget. A quote that stuck with me for years in measurement is, don't confuse activity with progress. That has always stuck with me, that it's easy to get wrapped up in, it becomes a full-time job to gather data, which of course is important, and somehow tying it to we're getting even better at collecting the data, or we've got more sensors or ways out there to gather data, more and more efficient along the way. So that number 5 is hopefully if you are in a very robust measurement strategy, it's not a one-time baseline and a one-time measurement. It's some kind of approach that's maintainable. And then number 6 and number 7, is it working? Number 6 is, how is it affecting change, as we were just talking about? And 7 is supposed to loop all the way back to number 1. Consider making changes to the measurement strategy. This is the continuous improvement side of measurement. So what are your tools and your purpose? Now you've done all this other work to go gather data, look at it, analyze it, make changes, come all the way back and see, did it fulfill the purpose? Merrill is the one that really helped me with some examples of purposes are trying to influence someone, trying to track progress. I can't even remember. There's 3 or 4 other things. To make decisions, gather all this data, do all this measurement to make better decisions. So there's, several examples of measurement purposes. And again, number 7 is supposed to help you loop back and improve on the whole strategy.
Yeah.
So
I can't, let me just add on that. I cannot underscore the importance of shifting as you need to, maybe every 6 months or every quarter. So it could be every 3 months, every 6 months, every 9 months, every 2. You have to go back and you have to revisit your indicators and you have to revisit how you're measuring things, because as your organization shifts, you're going to have to shift to it. So I can't underscore that enough. That's one of the things that I've learned over the years that is absolutely 100% important. You have to be able to go back and to be flexible and shift and revisit how you're measuring things.
So that's our content, right, Merrill?
Yeah, that's it.
So we'd love to get your thoughts. We'd love to hear your top 5 is what we're really thinking. So we've set up this Google Doc. I've just put the link in the chat. The idea is we'll do probably 2 rounds of small group breakouts for you to talk to other people on the call here about what you agreed and disagreed with our top 5, what's in your top 5. Lisa has already shared one in chat for everybody. We always like to do a little bit of a small group chat here. So I realize lots of people only scheduled 30 minutes. So it is helpful if you need to drop, understand, no problem at all. It does give me 1 second to make sure these rooms are set up. So let me just click a couple of buttons.
So John, while you do that, you'll see here in the slides that John has on the screen, there's one for breakout group 1, there's one for breakout group 3, 4, 5, 6. So please use the slide that is for your breakout group. And then when we come back, we'll look at all the slides together and we'll talk about it a little bit.
Have a chat. So here we go. I'll open up the breakouts and let's give you some time. So let's do It's funny. I'm going to do 13 minutes. So that way it brings us back right at, I think, 10 to the hour. So yeah, 13 minutes. We'll see you back here. Enjoy.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for engaging in conversation with us. We've just got 5 or 10 minutes left in case anybody would like to share with the full group here. How did it go? What did you learn? Wide open for anyone.
Yeah, we were in Breakout too, and I'm trying my video. So if it goes, then I'll switch off.
Okay.
But yeah, the real wave. Yeah, we were. I mean, we've got an order there. We like the idea of your flow. You know, the flow and stack stock. That was really good. But just with a matter of time, I think we just want to fly to the feeling side of things. That whatever the process is, or it's a lessons learned database and it's not being used, or in my case it was a sort of knowledge sharing forum, which is sort of getting a bit tired and people weren't turning up. Just trying to anything like that. Why aren't people doing it? It's almost like the feeling side, really. So which is a bit more than the qualitative, because I know, Merrill, you talk about touchy-feely. I thought, there you go, it's from the feelings, but it wasn't quite what we were meant. I think that was quite important. Yeah. I've got that from David Griffith's FAIR model, FAIRR, which sort of really resonated. Yeah, you've got to start off with humans' behaviour to start with, looking at the lessons learned, or going to this auditorium or whatever it is, interacting with the system. Why aren't you? So that was quite important. But I don't want to keep talking about group number 2. There are other groups.
Nice. Thanks, David.
I was also into, and we got a little bit more into the value discussion too. How do you quantify or qualify, I guess, value, and obviously surveys and feedback and things like that, but also accuracy, timeliness, delivery to the customer, things like that.
I see. I'm looking at group 2. Contributions, use, user interaction. Looks like you're number 1. I'm intrigued. Like, what does that mean? Contributions, use.
Just the actual getting people involved and having people, like David was saying, having people involved and aware and using the tools that are available to them and sharing.
Nice.
Interesting. It actually, that seems to me that it's sort of quantitative is necessary, but it seems like your number 1 is also measuring quantitative in some way, because you're measuring how many people are taking part of something, how many users are we getting engagement from, things like that.
Yes, it looks like that, but I think we meant more in the case of how they feel about it, how engaged they are.
So user engagement.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's got to satisfy the boss with the money.
Right. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, we all answer to somebody, right? And they're all asking, well, what's the money on this? Like, what's the return on the investment? Like, what am I getting for all this money I'm pouring into it?
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever their thing is, we've got to have a safer factories. We've got to be more innovative. The customer experience has got to be better. And how does KM help with that? Start off with how do they feel? Yep. It ain't safe. The experience is awful. Do something about it.
Yeah.
It's really fun to look across all the groups here. Thank you so much for this. This is fun. Group 1 had storytelling as their number 1. Group 2 has what we were just talking about, contributions, use, user interaction. This one's a little different. Content health, quantitative via inventory.
Yeah, talk about that. Who was in Breakup? Kirsty, Rubeda, Mandy?
I put that one in. For us, we're pretty early in our knowledge management journey in our organization, and the first thing we needed to be able to start to understand was, what's explicit. So what's been produced out there, and what is the quality of it, and how is it working? So we came up with a list of content standards, which look like and an inventory. So we started taking inventory of everything that we had, and the scope was just the HR content. And so our standards were things that we thought were aligning to user experience as well as business goals. So for user experience, we looked at things like findability, functionality, accuracy, just looking at my list here, scannability, understandability, usefulness, inclusive design. And then in terms of business goals, we said sustainability, like is there somebody who's like looking after the life cycle of this content to make sure that it's like properly reviewed? Do we have a content owner identified? And then the other piece was, is it on strategy, whatever their strategy is? So within HR, somebody's looking after benefits. Is all of the benefits content meeting this health requirement? And do we have it listed? And do we have everything in inventory? And then we started giving like ratings to these content owners to say, here's kind of where the health is. And so our first piece was findability. Like, is it in a spot where everybody can find it? And when they do find it, is it credible? Because that's going to get engagement going. So that was kind of the approach that we used there.
It's funny. I'm actually, I was telling John and Eric, while y'all were in the breakout room. So I actually worked for the Crypsis group, and then we were acquired by Palo Alto Networks. And so we are having to sort of mesh all of these different assets together. And one of the things I just got an invite for this week was a knowledge management project. I did not initiate this. Our VP initiated this. And it's because people aren't able to find, we're introducing new positions for sales folks, and people can't find the assets. They can't find the different things that they need. And so this is a conversation that I'm about to have as well. And I think you touched on something really important, which is you have to focus on the explicit to get to the tacit. Like, you have to know what you have, right, to get to the touchy-feely, eventually the feelings. And I think that that's really important.
I'm trying to pull up. We just ran, many of you will know that we run a free monthly knowledge cafe. And would you believe the one we just did on the 20th, so 4 days ago, was titled, listen to this, knowledge management is too hard to measure, but what if we ask an evaluation expert? So we brought in the president of, it was Gordon Wanzari. Some of you may know him. He's kind of a KM person, but he's the president of a South African Evaluation Society, I think is something like that. So he spoke for a good 30 minutes on like a very robust how to do measurement, which is, it sounded like what we were just talking about. So here, I'll put that in the chat. I just put the recording of not the whole knowledge cafe, but just his talk at the beginning of the cafe. So if that's related or of interest, it's
very good.
Yeah, thank you for being there, Diana. Yep. He had very detailed notes to share with us.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to share anything? Looks like we've got surveys. I love surveys. I'm a personal believer in surveys. I think surveys are fantastic. I love surveys. What else do we have in here, John?
So that was interesting, because in the company I used to work in, there were too many surveys from too many departments.
Yeah.
So really at the time when I thought, trying to measure the impact of this knowledge sharing forum would be good with a survey. But by then there was a bit of a moratorium. So nope.
Survey fatigue is real. And it's funny, when you work in monitoring and evaluation, you see that a lot with your key informants, because you oftentimes have people for an evaluation going out into the field and asking them a ton of questions, but they're being asked so many questions that you have to be cognizant of how often you're doing it, how long your surveys are, because survey fatigue isn't just how many surveys go out, it's the number of questions in your survey. So if you've got a 50 question survey, obviously, by question 50, you're going, is this really necessary? And so it's not always about, and I think you understand this, it's not always about the quantity of questions. It's about the quality of the questions, which I feel like gets back to storytelling, right? It's about the qualitative stuff. It's about the story you're trying to tell with your data, not just the numbers alone.
Yeah. In that situation, in my experience, I've been lucky and fortunate enough to work with the organisations on their overall employee engagement surveys, and actually brought in questions like, do I have the tools I need to do my job? And then use that. So they're already doing one survey, and I've just weeded in one that's relevant to knowledge management, or could be relevant, and then asked for that data by function or whatever, and then looked actually, where am I doing activity with those people in order to improve their knowledge management, and are we seeing monthly or quarterly shifts in how they're scoring that? So rather than actually going out with my own bespoke knowledge management question, I've piggybacked on somebody else's to try and avoid that survey fatigue.
That's exactly what we did. I did it. So I also am I'm the training and knowledge manager. And so we did that too. In that one survey, we tacked on training, knowledge management, and then career management. And it worked brilliantly, because it wasn't like they were getting 3 surveys. We just all sort of meshed it into one, and because the questions were related. But yeah, you make a great point, and that's a good way to do it. Piggybacking on other things. Well, John, we're at time.
We're at time. So yeah, thank you, Merrill. Thank you, Eric. And I guess we pass it back to Eric. Is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up?
No, that's it. Thank you very much for hosting. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll have, just mentioned in the chat, we'll have the recording for you. I know everyone likes to get the recording, so we'll send that to this list. You'll get that first. But thank you, folks.
Good to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your afternoon or evening or day.
Thank you, Merrill. Thank you, John. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.